my people. And if you're watching live, checking us out on YouTube, or listening on your favorite podcast provider, you are most definitely my people. Welcome to another episode of Botched and Chair Shots. We have high hopes of delivering quality wrestling content, except today when there won't be any, or very little. But we do sprinkle in some of the warden, so we still get over. I am your host, the Chef by Trade and Mark by Choice. I am the Will Gray, and I'm glad to be here on this journey. And that journey today is Michael versus Michael. So, joining me for a very special edition of Botched and Chair Shots is the host of the #1 podcast on the Hub. He is the patron saint of podcasting, the warden. He is my personal Pornhub poppy. Fuck Matt Riddle. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Matt Ritter. Matt, welcome back.
What's going on? Not only the /1 wrestling podcast on Pornhub, but I just mentioned to you, dropping some exclusive news, soon to be the #1 horror plus. We'll say horror plus podcast on Pornhub. I dabbled in a little something that I called Terror Bites for a while. I had a Facebook group for it. I did a couple things here or there, and it didn't really take off. And I've decided that I'm going to bring it back and start doing semi-regular horror content as well. So I will have a home for horror, my second love, probably my first love actually, over wrestling, to discuss stuff like we're going to talk about tonight.
You were the immediate pick for this episode. I usually text you that mid to end of the month thing, and I'm like, hey, do you want to do something next month? You know what I mean? Like, do you have any ideas? Do you want to do something fun? And this time I was like, let's do, we did the history of the strap, but then I was like, let's kind of do it in a movie version. Like let's kind of break down a film franchise. So like you said, horror was your #1 or #2. It's in my top 3 with wrestling and gaming. So I was like, Matt's the guy for this pick. The one piece of Botched Spots and Chair Shots we're going to keep, though, is Pissed Off for Greatness. You told me to go first because you want to use yours after mine. So mine is, what has me most pissed off right now is tampering in wrestling and fights in the locker rooms. And right now, this seems to be the big focal point of what everybody's talking about with AEW's meltdown. But when I look at it, this is what was happening from the 1960s through the 1980s. We just didn't hear about it because there weren't dirt sheets giving us the bullshit week over week over week. So everybody seems like this is this new thing. And I'm like, guys, read a history book. Like, go back and see what was happening. Vern Gagne, Bill Watts, these guys, Dusty Rhodes, these guys they didn't give a shit about tampering. If they wanted to bring somebody into their territory, they figured out how to get hold of the guy. They brought him in and they used him. And I feel like in pro wrestling, that's almost expected. So now TK's up in arms because Triple H had somebody reach out to FTR, or the Bucks reached out to somebody in WWE, whatever the case is. This has been happening the whole time. It's only big now because AEW is trying to make it big.
I 100% agree. And along with that, something that's kind of gotten on my nerves, and we addressed it a little bit on the latest episode of Smackin' It Raw.
Which was awesome, by the way. Shameless plug for you. Like, that was a great episode.
Listen, egos are a thing in wrestling, right? I don't understand why everyone is shitting all over CM Punk for A, having an ego, but B, in my personal opinion, it is the EVPs, who are executive vice presidents, who need to be held to a higher standard because they are in an executive vice president role. So the fact that they're getting off so easy because they told some sob story about protecting puppies and getting, first off, CM Punk's 40-something years old, just got them. He doesn't move fast enough to sucker punch you if you're coming through a locker room door. Let's be honest. You see that shit coming. He's old and slow. That's what everyone's saying about him. He's not the old CM Punk. He's old. He's slow. He doesn't move as fast. But we believe that he can get up and run and throw a Superman punch and sucker punch. Like, get the fuck out of here. It drives me nuts. Like, everyone's at fault. Everyone's at fault. But you see a whole lot more hate for CM Punk and how awful and toxic he is than the EVPs, who are in executive roles, who went in there and picked a fucking fight. And that drives me nuts. But my pissed off for greatness actually has nothing to do with wrestling, because you got me in this horror mood. It's spooky season. I've been doing a bunch of horror, and one of the first things I watched was one of my favorite shows, Ash versus Evil Dead. And what has me pissed off for greatness is that they canceled this fucking show off Stars and that we never got a real conclusion to it, because this show, if you have not seen it, is fucking fantastic. I believe it's on Netflix. You need to go watch it. Bruce Campbell is great. The characters hold up, the effects, the kills, everything brutal, fun. It's a good mix of horror and comedy, as the Evil Dead series is, and it kind of gives a little more lore and basis to something that I've been working on personally for a unified horror universe. So yes, I'm just pissed off that I'm never going to get a new episode of Ash versus Evil Dead, because that show was fucking awesome.
It's on my list. I haven't watched it. What did you think about the most recent Evil Dead remake versus
I loved it.
Did you like it?
Yeah, so I've said this before, I'm not a huge Sam Raimi fan. Everyone's like, oh, Sam Raimi Spider-Man, and I'm like, not really for me, but you know, it is what it is. Don't get me wrong, I thought Multiverse of Madness was great, because Doctor Strange's Multiverse of Madness was essentially Evil Dead in a horror movie.
Correct.
Or, he literally resurrected an Evil Dead version of himself and fought as a zombie. Like, it was Evil Dead as a horror movie. There were fucking evil books and all of the Evil Dead stuff. Yes, that's what he did. So I enjoyed that, and I do enjoy, you know, Army of Darkness, because it's comedy and stuff like that. But when we went and we did this new version, Bruce Campbell, Sam Raimi were involved as producers, and they wanted to make sure that this was not going to be compared and torn down by setting it up against the original Evil Dead. And they really made it like dark and scary and serious. And honestly, it is one of my top, because it came out in 2013. So yeah, top favorite horror movies of the last decade.
Nice. Okay, so looking at that in a horror movie sense, we're going to break down in what my opinion is, and I think you're on the same page, with one of the biggest horror franchises of all time, featuring arguably the number one horror villain of all time, the man, the myth, the legend, Michael Myers. Looking at it in a series of, I guess, not a trilogy, that's not what I'm going to say, but a series of threes. You look at the original series from the original 78, John Carpenter, you know, Deborah Hill, okay? You start there. Then you look at the Rob Zombie, you know, the Malika Cod, like that style. And then you look at the newest trilogy that just started a few years ago that's coming to, you know, Halloween Kills, and then Halloween Ends.
So actually, it's a quadrilogy. There are, if you count Rob Zombie's remake as its own timeline, there are essentially 4 timelines. You have the OG timeline, which is 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. And then you have the H2O timeline, which is 1, 2, H2O, and Resurrection. Then you have the current timeline, which is 1, Halloween Kills, Halloween Ends, and then Rob Zombie's whole separate deal. Because they do basically not course correct, because I don't like that term, and I actually prefer the first 5 movies, not counting 3, in the franchise as some of my favorites. They alter the timeline. So like Loki, you know, variant Michael Myers, who after the second movie did different things, or in the case of the newest one, after the first movie did different things.
So looking at the original, we're going to start the conversation with the original Halloween and Halloween 2. So 10/25/78, Deborah Hill, John Carpenter. John Carpenter was the director. Rick Rosenthal came in and directed number 2, but Carpenter and Deborah Hill were both producers and screenwrites. Then you look at the zombie verse, and that's what we're going to call it, because we're going to look at those first 2 and then Zombies 2. Both also released in October, 2 years apart. Zombie used producers Malika Cod and Andy Gould, but handled all of his writing and directing duties. So when we start the conversation there, what are your initial thoughts for the original 2 versus Rob Zombie's first 2? As a kicking off point for this conversation.
You cannot top the original 2 Halloween films. So both Halloween 2 and H2, Rob Zombie's H2, have issues. So Halloween 2 was something that they forced John Carpenter to make that he did not want to make. And he said he came up with the whole brother-sister storyline while getting drunk one night, trying to figure out a way to make sense. Because his original plan was Halloween was not going to be a franchise about Michael Myers. It was going to be an anthology series about the day of Halloween, which is, they're like, well, bring him back one more time, kill him for good. It did so well. Like, let's do something because he got up at the end of the first movie. So they forced him to make that. And that's why, obviously, Halloween 3 went where Halloween 3 went. H2, I loved Rob Zombie's Halloween. It is like redneck hillbilly Halloween. It's very much Rob Zombie doing his thing. It's Devil's Rejects and Halloween. But H2 got really fucking weird and lost me. It really did. Like, the white horse and the mom and all that, like, it really lost me.
One of my favorite things about Rob Zombie's H1 was the origin story. We got to see Michael as a kid. We kind of got that aspect of it. So I appreciated that. In the group, or in the chat between us, I told you this morning, I said my biggest take is Rob Zombie's version of it, and you kind of said it. He kind of, with the Devil's Rejects, House of a Thousand Corpses vibe to it, he took the story, added heavy metal music to it, and slapped that Rob Zombie coat of paint on it. And I feel like, however cool that was, like you said, it was near impossible to make a better version of the first one. But looking at his version of it, do you think that's what he was doing, or do you think he was just making what he would say is his version of the first one? Was it to play homage to what John Carpenter did, or was it just to do his, like, the Rob Zombie version of Halloween?
Well, I do know Rob has done a few interviews, and he has great respect for everything John Carpenter did, which is why he did this in the first place. And he wanted to stay true to it, but also tell it like you said. So one of my favorite album, or not favorite, first albums that I ever got from Rob Zombie, I think it was like a remix album. It was called Hellbilly Deluxe, and it had like all the hits on it. And I think Hellbilly is the perfect way to describe both his music and his movie making style. It's horror and hillbilly together. But I definitely think he really just wanted to take something and stay as close to what it was as possible, but update it for the time, which was, I believe, 2007 or 2005. I know it's 2007 to 2009. Updated for those times, as well as tell it in his own way, like the way he would have told it if he was writing the movie, while trying to stay as true to the original as possible, which is why the opening of H2 is fantastic, because you stick to the hospital that you get in Halloween 2 and all that. Then you find out it's just a dream and it didn't really happen. And then the movie gets really fucking weird, and he took acid or shrooms or something and went off on some crazy tangent. I don't know what the fuck happened.
When you look at those first two movies, such a polarizing individual is Dr. Sam Loomis, Michael's psychiatrist or his doctor, however you want to describe who Sam Loomis is. He's portrayed in the original series, he's portrayed in Halloween, Rob Zombie's, and he's portrayed in the newest series. When you look at his character in these first two movies, what do you think Dr. Sam Loomis means to Michael as a person and the parallels of going alongside each other? Because you see him in all three movies, so he's obviously polarizing enough that he's a major part of who Michael Myers is.
Oh, Sam, in my opinion, Sam Loomis is as important to the franchise itself as Laurie Strode and Michael Myers. Because he is that, well, Michael is doing what Michael does, and he is traveling from place to place and killing everything. Loomis is really the one, especially in the first movie, that's driving the story forward. And he gives you all of the context of like what's happening and talking to the police and who Michael is, and really kind of explains to you what the shape, what the evil behind the child / grown man in the first movie is that he found, and really makes you get invested in not only his character, but that character, because you want to see him stop this evil and save that girl. But also Michael Myers has kind of become its own cult icon himself, and it's a lot of the work that Samuel Loomis did and a lot of the groundwork that he laid to make you care about and feel about Michael the way he is, and put him on that iconic status. Like, it's his quotes about Michael, because Michael doesn't talk, that you think about when you go to describe Michael Myers. It's exactly what Sam said. I am not a huge fan of the version of Sam Loomis in Rob Zombie's movies, because Rob took him from what we just talked about in the originals and decided to make him kind of a self-absorbed, condescending, uh all about himself guy who didn't really care about Michael at all or care to really stop him. It was more, I'm going to make money off of this. And then in the end, he kind of saw a little sort of redemption arc, but not really. So, but that was one of my least favorite parts of the new movies was their portrayal of Sam Loomis. Also, I have a fondness for Sam Loomis because he looks just like my grandfather and kind of like me. Like, I think I may do Dr. Loomis for Halloween this year. So,
When you look at the way Sam Loomis, Dr. Loomis, portrayed Michael, he was this cold, absent, I don't want to say mindless, but he had only one thing on his mind, murder. And all the things that he built him up to be this character. But then you see him in the zombie version and the way the stewards in the hospital react, where they talk to him. They're like, hey, Mike, like super cool, and he's really collected with them. He doesn't have any problems. And then the one dude who messes with his stuff and he's like, don't mess with his things, then Michael loses his mind, right? Like, do you think with Sam Loomis saying, okay, he's not completely absent of all this, there is a chance to bring that person back, giving him that little bit of, making him that little bit human to where the stewards and the orderlies know they can talk to him and be his friend, so to speak? Like, what do you think about that portrayal of him? Because in some versions of the movies, he was this absent-minded killer. But then Rob Zombie almost made this human touch to him in some ways with the orderlies and stuff like that being able to talk to him.
so I've always kind of had a conflict with exactly what you're talking about in the Rob Zombie movies because my understanding when I watch the Rob Zombie film and I look at it is essentially, they give the backstory of Michael torturing animals and doing all this, which is the stuff you hear about serial killers, right? But if you pay attention, if you really closely pay attention, all Michael is trying to do is go home and reunite his family. He wants to get his sister, go home, and live the life that was taken away from him. That's what he was concerned about. When can I leave? When can I go? When can I go? And everyone that he hurts is someone that has either hurt him or kind of tried to keep his family apart. So his sister's boyfriend who pick on him and are mean to him, his drunken stepfather who he, duct tapes to a chair and slits his throat. The orderly who comes in and sees a picture of his sister and says she can't be related to you, and then he murders her because she's, being mean to him. Same thing. He kills. So it depends on also which version of the Rob Zombie movie you watch because there's the regular version where you have a lot of characters from Devil's Rejects who play guards that he slaughters that are trying to stop him from leaving, and then you have the very graphic unrated version where they go in and they take some girl and they do some things to her in his room and start taking his masks off the wall and wearing them and really getting him riled up, and then he murders them. Danny Trejo's murder always kind of bothered me though, because like you said, Danny was always so nice to Michael, and the only justification I really have is Danny was trying to put him back in his room, and he saw that this was his way to leave, and Danny was, even though doing so nicely, stopping him from getting home. But I mean, he even, if you think about it, he killed one of his sister's friends, but brought her back home so that she had a companion at home, despite the fact that she was dead, for her to play with. Like, hey, this is one of your friends. Let me bring her back. Like, everyone that he attacks in that movie and everyone that he kills has attacked him, fought him, been mean to him, hurt him in some way, shape, or form, or tried to keep him from reuniting his family, which is a very interesting dynamic and almost kind of makes you, like you said, because of the human side of it, sympathize with Michael a little more.
So that piece of the puzzle is his sister. So when you think about Lori and you think about Jamie Lee Curtis and who she was in the series, like, let's kind of analyze that, because the original version, and then once again, just since we're on that point right now before we branch out into the large picture of it, she was very much portrayed two very different ways. So let's kind of start looking at his sister a little bit now.
Um, Rob Zombie made Laurie Strode a little more relatable, a less of the uber clean cut good girl. Though even in John Carpenter's movie, she gets high with Annie in the car. Like, she's not, you know, pure as the driven snow. Like she has a little bit of a wild side, but for the most part, she's Susie Homemaker. She's carving pumpkins and
She's still that
doing
girl
things.
next door,
Yeah,
you know?
she's got the the whole virginal aspects, and she doesn't want to talk to boys and this and that. And Lori's a little more a little more relatable for most teen girls in the first movie. Um, so I appreciate both aspects of it. And then, like I said, also in the first movie, Lori wasn't even meant to be Michael's sister. That comes later and is just kind of, oh shit, what am I gonna do? Why does he? Oh, they're brother and sister. Like that's why he cares. That's why he was looking for her. So, um, and then you look at the new movies, which we'll talk about, where they're like, oh, that's not even really a thing. That's just something somebody made up, which is kind of funny because John Carpenter's the one that made it up. Uh, and they're not even related. And then you find out that Michael isn't even give a shit about Lori, really. That's not his motivation. Uh, it's home. He wants to be home. But yeah. I love both portrayals. Like I said, the Lori character carries over better for me in both the H2O franchise and, the second movie, and then later on played by Jamie Lee Curtis than it does by Scout Taylor Compton, who I think is fantastic and did a great job, by the way. Also, huge boon to Rob Zombie for casting Danielle Harris, who played the niece in 4 and 5 as Annie in his remake, because I love Danielle Harris. I just watched Hatchet, which Hatchet 2 and 3 have her as the main character as well. Fucking absolutely love Danielle Harris. The only person I've ever met in real life at a horror convention that I was not able to talk to. Like I got starstruck and choked up. My wife makes fun of me for it all the time because I go up and I'm like, "Hi, I'm Matt." Nice, like only time I've ever been starstruck.
So you kind of started touching on it, and it was one of the questions I wanted to bring up was kind of that lineage between Laurie and Michael, because like you said in the first movie, they didn't come out and say this is Michael's sister and this is why, right? It was in the second movie was the first time you really found out why Michael was so infatuated with her. So like that kind of bridge between the two. Do you think that was a blind luck? They didn't think it through. They weren't really sure. Did John Carpenter already have it written and it was just supposed to be a surprise turn, or did he just have to have a piece to connect the puzzle?
Well, like I said, it's definitely he had to have a piece to connect the puzzle because my wife had bought me a book about the making of the franchise, and in it, and I think I mentioned it earlier, uh, when they told him that they were going to do Halloween 2 and it wasn't going to be an anthology, they wanted a continuation of the Michael Myers story. They were like, "Hey, I need you to make this," and he's like, "Shit!" So he like wrote the whole thing very fast while getting drunk and came up with that on the fly. Is like, hey, why would Michael still care about this girl after getting shot and running away? It's his sister. And then it kind of went from there. And he actually wasn't a fan of that, which is why I think when they came back to do the new versions of the movies, because they also had him as an executive producer and a consultant, they decided to just go off what was made in one and leave that part out as well and kind of build the franchise from there.
Okay, so this is going to be the first time I'm going to ask you a question. We're going to kind of bridge away from the zombie verse and the Carpenter verse, so to speak. And I'm going to bring up a name. I'm going to say a person's name, then I'm going to say a title of a movie. And I want you to tell me your initial thoughts, blind reaction, and then we'll kind of go into what it was. Tommy Lee
Okay.
Wallace, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch.
Fantastic movie if you can take the stigma of Halloween away from it. Everyone associates Halloween with Michael Myers. Season of the Witch, catchy ass theme song, fun concept. And if it wasn't the third movie in a franchise that everyone wanted to be about Michael Myers, or if it was just Season of the Witch, I think it would have done so much better. But I think everyone came back to watch Halloween 3 for Michael Myers and all they got, which mind you, it's still part of the universe because Michael Myers is on a TV so in the universe of Halloween 3, Halloween exists and it's on the TV, but it's a movie like it is for us. It's not, actual factual events. So, I, for what it is, if you take it by itself, it's fantastic. When you look at the franchise, obviously it's a weird outlier that has nothing to do with the rest of the story and then kind of makes things weird when you try and watch it in order. from 1 through 6 and so on and so forth.
Reek says he says Halloween 3 deserves more love. Got to watch it through its own scope, especially during the 80s. It definitely fit in. And one of the things I was going to say is if you look at the way it is, it went away from that graphic, over the top gore and violence side of horror and relied more on the thriller, that suspense, the occult, the witchcraft side of horror. So you're absolutely right when you said that it's not your standard Halloween movie, but if you watch it in its own bubble, it's not a bad film. It's not Michael Myers. It's the only one of the series where he's not the antagonist, but it still happens in the same universe where the lore of Halloween Night and, you know, the big bad wolf boogeyman kind of like, it's there in foreshadowing and context and even on the screen in a shot where a movie's playing in the background, but it's still there in thought. And if you watch it on its own, it's not a bad film. It just catches a lot of flack because of where it falls in the Halloween spectrum.
And the whole weird relationship in the movie between the girl whose dad is dead, who seems way too young to be with the much older doctor, that is kind of fucking creepy. I'm not gonna lie.
There's a lot of weird things from the 80s though, Matt. Like
There is, yeah, there is. Yes.
like if we want to deep dive into that, like I was like, yeah, I don't even want to open that rabbit hole. There's a lot of weird shit that came out from the 80s. So let's go back to the chronological cycle and Halloween 4, the return of Michael Myers. This was the first one that had nothing to do, John Carpenter had nothing to do with it. You had Dwight H. Little. It was in the late 80s now, and it was Michael came back. Where do you think Halloween 4 ranks in the spectrum? Because we're almost in the canon of the story, so to speak. We're almost halfway to where Rob Zombie came in. You know what I mean? Because they made these versions, if you count H2O and Resurrection, until the mid 90s. You know what I mean? The Curse of Michael Myers came out in 95. That was a Joe Chappelle movie. And once again, after the Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, John Carpenter had nothing to do with the series after that. You get into Rick Rosenthal and Steve Miner and those guys. But looking at Halloween 4, when Michael comes back, let's kind of hit that now.
Okay. Halloween 4 is kind of dead in the middle of the pack for me. Like I said, this timeline 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6 is still probably my favorite timeline, though the current timeline is very easily rivaling that. And with Halloween Ends may kind of supplant it, but it has always been my favorite timeline. Well, the next movie that we'll probably talk about isn't the greatest. This one, like I said, you have to make the story go on. And this, again, what's so important to me about Michael Myers and all of this is the mythos of who Michael Myers is. The fact that he is the shape. He is, this evil, unstoppable, unkillable being, unlike everyone else who can die. And he's blown up. He's shot in the eyes and blown up at the end of 2. He's on fire. Done, right? But no, you find out not only did Sam Loomis live, but Michael lived, and he has just basically been in a healing coma this entire time. And now that he's all healed up and ready to go, breaks free, finds out that his sister had a child and died in a car crash, and he goes after his sister. And you won't find out why, or sorry, his sister's daughter. You won't find out why he goes after Jamie until the 6th movie, when the whole sort of plot behind who Michael Myers really is revealed. But again, Danielle Harris, fantastic. The parallels between her and Michael at the end of the film, where she wears the same costume and attacks her, I guess it wouldn't be stepmother, it'd be foster mother, or
that weird. She's not
adopted mother.
It's like when you call somebody your aunt, but they're not actually related to you at all. Like it's that weird, like ambiguous relationship.
Yeah.
Looking at the original timeline now, 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. 4, 5, and 6 is a very unique trio of movies. Revenge of Michael Myers and Curse of Michael Myers, both respectfully, typically lay at the bottom of the pack in a lot of people's opinions with the series of movies. I don't want to spend that I want to get into H2O, but when you look at 4, 5, and 6 as a trio, where do you rank them 1, 2, and 3 in your mind, though? Because I know 5 and 6 are not seen very highly in the film realm for horror movies.
5 is at the bottom with H2 of the entire franchise, everything. 6 is in my top 3.
Okay.
It is my personal favorite Halloween of all time because,
Wow. Okay.
well, first off, you have two versions. You have the theatrical release and you have the producer's cut. And while the producer's cut does do some weird things and may imply that Jamie and Michael had an incest baby, it also digs way deeper into the lore of the Thorn, which I have right here on my wrist, just like Michael. What his power is, where it comes from, and until Halloween ends, this has been the most brutal, angry, mean, violent version of Michael Myers. Like, if you want to see Michael Myers fuck people up, you watch Halloween 6. This is the biggest, most imposing, most badass, most Kane early 1998, early 1999 into 2001 version of Michael Myers you're going to get. And he uses everything to stop them. Plus, fucking Paul Rudd. Like, who doesn't love Paul Rudd coming back as the child that survived Michael Night 1, Tommy? And I will give Paul Rudd Tommy all day over fucking the new Tommy, who's the actor. I can't think of his fucking name, but
I'll look it up. I have no idea either. Okay, so 4, 5, and 6. When we can't talk about it without bringing them up. H2O and Resurrection. Okay, we get to the late 90s, early 2000s. I've already mentioned Rick Rosenthal, Steve Miner. Steve Miner did H2O. Then you get into the incorporation. It's going into that early 2000s run. They're trying to appeal to that pop culture. I mean, hell, we got Busta Rhymes, right? Like, where did when you look at the canon though, Halloween 2, then it's H2O now. Looking at that timeline, how did you think H2O fell into the Halloween spectrum? Because this is my least favorite of all the Halloween movies. 5 is pretty terrible, but this one is probably my personal least favorite.
Also very low. This was very much Halloween trying to be I Know What You Did Last Summer, you know, that PG-13 teen-esque horror movie that was hot in the late 90s, early 2000s, and H2O came out in 98, 20 years later after, 78. You erased everything that happened in 4, 5, and 6. You reset that. While I do appreciate that they brought Jamie Lee Curtis back and she was back involved in the franchise, I've talked about this with Reek on the Havoc Hour. The masks in this movie, some of them are fucking terrible. Some of them aren't even really Halloween masks. They're just weird blank white slates. They're terrible. The only saving grace of this movie, in my opinion, is LL Cool J. Other than that, like, yeah, no, this movie's bad. It really is. It's bottom 3 for sure, and it's really 5 gets a little bit of saving grace because of its connection to 4 and 6, even though it's definitely the worst of those 3, and there's a lot of bad in that too. I still think H2 is my least favorite, so I think it's either H2 is very bottom of the pack, and then either H2O or 5.
When you brought it up, when you think of those late 90s, I Know What You Did Last Summers, they came out that spring and summer range in 1997, a full year after this whole cycle is ran. Was H2O simply that, just a way to ride the coattails of a successful season with where they thought they could combine what was a flash in the pan at the time with a already established horror genre?
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, this was what was hot in horror, so they wanted to take Halloween and capitalize on what was hot and make some money off it. They cast Josh Hartnett, they cast Michelle Williams from Dawson's Creek, they got LL Cool J in there. They made it very much a toned down version of what Halloween has been, and kind of copied that for formula while still doing judges and things like. I mean, we had Joseph Gordon-Levitt in this movie too, like, which is actually one of the best kills. Like, Sam Loomis is dead and gone, so this is the first movie we have without Dr. Loomis in it, which also hurt, I think, a little bit because kind of hard to, again, he was a huge part of those first 5 movies, 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. So you have to bring Laurie back because what else are you going to do now without Sam Loomis being there? So
Reek says they were all under Dimension films too. Lots of familiarity, same music, same producers, and all. That was going to be one of my questions as we got towards the end of this series, because now that we've gotten through Resurrection and kind of what was happening in the early 2000s, we already
didn't really talk about Resurrection, and I do want to.
Okay,
I want to give.
No, go ahead. Please.
I want to give Resurrection props. All
okay.
right, because again, another film that a lot of people shit on, and honestly, in my opinion, it's a very fucking unique take to go the route that they did. First off, you chop Michael Myers' head off, and you had to figure out a way, and they did find a very clever way to do it. You killed Laurie Strode in the beginning of the movie, like right off the bat, and used the end of the last movie to do that. Yes, you had Busta Rhymes, but the whole idea of reality television and strapping, cameras on to these people and taking them in there. Also, we had Tyra Banks, so that was a plus. And having them go through the Myers house and having it kind of play up the whole, like, yes, reality TV isn't really reality TV. It's all fixed. But what happens when reality TV gets fucking real and there's an actual Michael Myers who's actually in the house, actually killing these people, and all the shit that you staged is just bullshit. I honestly don't think it gets as much credit as it deserves. And everyone's like, oh, well, Busta Rhymes is kicking Michael Myers in the face and this and that. Like, he's a big dude. Like, if I got kicked in the face, like, that's the thing. Michael Myers is unkillable, but he's not unfazable. Like, you can take him down. You can knock him down. You can hit him.
Let's not forget throughout this series that, Laurie's I'm not taking away when I say this. Michael is this big, unstoppable beast, and he's been bested by a woman multiple times. Like, you know what I mean? Like, granted, through
most horror movie franchise characters are bested by women and the men die.
That's what I'm saying. Like, yeah, like that's the way it falls. So like, you have to look at it like that. Like, his track record speaks to that. Like, he might be unstoppable, but he's gotten beat up by his little sister multiple times, or big sister, I guess, technically.
I feel bad for Resurrection because it gets shit on really hard, and I don't think it deserves. I mean, one of my favorite lines in the entire franchise is Busta Rhymes grabbing her and pulling her in and being like, "Everyone's dead. We got to get the fuck out of here." Like,
when you also look at Resurrection, you get a version of Laurie that you don't see a lot of, and that's the crazy batshit nuts Laurie that's locked up in the asylum too. Like, it's a version of she's taken a life, she's killed people, thinking like, this is a version of Laurie that we don't necessarily see. She's this very strong, independent woman, but in this movie, you get a very different version of her. So you're right. We can't necessarily blow by that. But what do you think about this version? Because it's Jamie Lee Curtis, too. They didn't recast it. She got to come in and play a new version of herself in a new timeline for the movie. Did that make any sense at all, what I was trying to say?
No, it did. So I'm kind of torn because, again, this is the new timeline. We had Michael Myers breaks out, comes home, finds his sister, goes after his sister, gets blown up, comes back, sister's dead, hunts down niece, has child with niece after years of being defeated twice by her, psychic connections, Celtic demons possessing his body, causing him to want to murder every living member of his family. And they're like, all right, so after he got blown up in the hospital, Michael just disappeared. Laurie changed her name, got remarried, became an alcoholic, had a kid, got divorced, can't let go of the trauma of Halloween, which is interesting because they do the same thing in the next set of movies we're going to talk about, but they do it in a very different way, kind of. She's almost immobilized by her fear of Michael to this point, and it's ruining all of her relationships. But she's not prepared in any way, shape, or form for Michael's return. She constantly expects it. Oh, and the fact that the number 17 is so important in these fucking movies for some goddamn reason, which, again, I've also talked about, because the whole reason Michael shows up 20 years later is because when he killed his 17-year-old sister in the first movie, then he came back for his 17-year-old sister in the second movie, and now her son is 17. So for whatever reason, Michael just hates the fucking number 17, and anytime somebody he knows turns 17, he shows up to kill people, which is a weird fucking explanation. So that whole thing and the logic behind H2O bothers me. However, when you get into Resurrection, like you said, now Laurie is ready. Now she's hiding the pills in a doll. Now she's setting up traps. Now she knows Michael's definitely coming back, and we kind of get this Home Alone-esque trap setup thing that we see in the later films. That is why I love these new films so much, is they do so much homaging and pulling from all of the other films, from 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, even H2O and Resurrection, to build out the characters and to build out the universe that we now live in. So, yes, I love the new portrayal, but also no, I don't. But I guess I have to give it credit because you let it play out and it's a timeline, and Laurie had to go through H2O to get to who she was in Resurrection before she got murdered, but also was still dumb and fell for the same shit. And instead of killing Michael, got killed.
So looking at it with what you just said, I wrote down the words Laurie Strode hyphen Kevin McAllister, because in my head, when you were describing that and you said the Home Alone setting the booby traps things, in my head I was playing out Home Alone with Kevin McAllister instead of Macaulay Culkin was Laurie Strode, like running through, and instead of the sticky bandits we had Michael Myers. So it was a very comedic run through. I like that analogy though, because she was a totally different person. She had to act differently, and then she still ended up short because she ended up dying.
Also, shot at Resurrection, and I think we've spent enough time on this after that, because it's fucking H2O on Resurrection. Not that I don't enjoy it. I hate the fact that we just completely ignored the fact that she had a son, that we didn't bring her son back, like that Josh Hartnett or somebody recast as his character was just all of a sudden not around and not relevant anymore. Like, we killed Laurie and then we just moved on and left. Like, there are two characters in the Halloween franchise we never got any redemption for, and that is the child of Michael and Jamie that we still have at the end of Halloween 6, and the son of Jamie, or sorry, the son of Laurie, that we have at the end of Halloween H2O, who just leaves and we never see again.
Okay, before we get into the 2018 version of Michael, I have a couple questions for you to kind of let us decompress some before we dive into these last three movies. Okay. Which was the best version of Michael Myers? Not your favorite movie, not your favorite actor. In which movie did they give us the best version of Michael Myers?
See, that's hard because it all depends. It's going to be different for everyone because it all depends on what you like in Michael Myers. I'll say objectively, the first movie, the original Halloween, the standard of what Michael Myers is, the way the shape moves. And we talked about this when we did Horror Movie and Waffles, how a lot of those movements inspired The Undertaker, who is my all-time favorite wrestler. I know we said we weren't going to do a lot of wrestling, but hey, here's a little bit.
We're still
Kane
a wrestling
also.
show.
Yeah, exactly. And Kane also. So it's hard to say that it's not the original movie, because the original movie, those movements, the head tilt, all of that is what is iconic about Michael and what carries on. If you want a movie where Michael is an absolute brutal killer, it's either going to be Halloween Ends or Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, because that is, in my opinion, the most badass version of Michael Myers. So it all really depends on what you're looking for. But I think overall, if it was not for the original portrayal, which still holds up to this day, which is the blueprint for everything that Michael Myers is, then we wouldn't get anything else. So I'd have to go with number 1.
Agreed. I think he's my personal favorite. I did like, once again, going back to Horror Movies and Waffles, I used the reference of him kind of going Super Saiyan. You know what I mean? When he had the ability to lose his mind and freak out. And he 12 dudes on top of him with hatchets and pitchforks, and nobody could take him down. You know what I mean? Like, I
Mhm.
thought that was the most badass version of him. So using that as the segue, obviously Halloween Ends is going to be that, but you can't take away the classic of who he was in the original, like you were saying. And I think, speaking back to that, is the way John Carpenter shot the movie as well. Like, he knew he was doing something. I was trying to find it, but I'm not technologically savvy enough to get it up in time. But I wanted to have the diagrams to show you the color palettes for each movie, because I was
Yeah.
looking them up, but I couldn't find them all the way through. And John Carpenter's movies were very inherently dark
Oh yeah.
all the way through. Rob Zombie's had the flashes, and the new ones, are darks with greens and purples and flashes. But the original one, it was like dark the whole time, and it was made and shot to be that way. So I think that gives you something there. Second question: The Mask, William Shatner.
Yes.
Like, what do you think about that, and the irony that they would use a Star Trek captain, and he would be the most iconic person in the one of the most iconic people in the horror industry, but never actually appear in any of the movies that I'm aware of? If there's a cameo that he's there that I can't think of, that would surprise me. But I looked it up and couldn't find a William Shatner cameo in any of the Halloween movies. But he is literally the mask they use for Michael Myers. What do you think about that?
There's always time for Halloween Ends.
Yeah.
I know that. I mean, it was a low budget film, and they were like, "Hey, what can we go get from the store, real quick?" And that's what they went and got. Painted it white, changed the hair. If you look at it, it's almost hard to even tell that it is William Shatner. And I would argue that Michael in a William Shatner mask has almost become more iconic than William Shatner himself, just from face value. I think it's funny. I wish that they had continued to make William Shatner masks so we didn't get the shitty stuff that we saw. I mean, the because you changed the actor, it was kind of the same mask, but it was really tight in 2, so it looked different. 4 and 5 had some of the worst masks, along with H2O, which was terrible. Um, I don't think, because then they're starting to make Halloween masks. They're trying to make masks that look like Michael Myers instead of taking the mask that they used for Michael Myers and making that the mask. Now they're trying to stylize a mask to look like him. Um, the Rob Zombie one was cool. That is one of my favorite things that they did with the Rob Zombie mask was the way they aged it, the damage that the mask took. Because in every movie, if he doesn't have a mask, like in 4, he goes to a drugstore and he grabs a mask. Like, it is what it is, and there's just happens to be his mask laying around and people have it and so on and so forth. So, um, William Shatner, I want to know how William Shatner feels about the fact that he is probably not getting paid for a very successful franchise that is essentially he's the face of.
That was kind of what I was asking you. Like,
Yeah.
the funny, like when I was saying he's never had a cameo. Like, I think the irony there is that the movies and the franchise and the spin-offs, because we didn't touch on any of the graphic novels or the comics or anything. We've just looked solely at the franchise from a movie perspective. Um, Let me ask you kind of a loaded question that just came to mind. When you think about the Michael Myers mask, you think about Jason Voorhees and the ski mask. You think about Freddy Krueger and the glove. You think about Chucky and the doll and the butcher's knife or the chef's knife. Do you think Michael Myers mask, that Michael Myers, is number one for horror movie icons? When you look at everything, Freddy's glove, the Jason Voorhees, like I said, just the list, because there's only a couple that are even remotely close to being on that level.
No. Halloween is my favorite, and currently right now, seeing as there's been a revitalized, or Chucky's been revitalized. There's going to be a new Hellraiser coming out in a couple weeks on Hulu. So a lot of these horror. There was another Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So a lot of these horror movie franchises are getting revived, but it it's kind of like Hulk Hogan. All right.
Wow. That wasn't somebody I expected to come up today, Matt.
regardless of what I prefer and what I like better, it's hard to deny the mainstream success of something. And Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees in pop culture and in mainstream media penetrated a way that Michael Myers never really did. I may not like them as much as I like Michael. I think he's personally better, but I cannot deny their mainstream success. I think Hulk Hogan is absolute shit. I cannot deny the fact that he had mainstream success. So I can't say that while he is the blueprint, while without Michael Myers, there would be no Friday the 13th, like I said, especially Freddy Krueger and Robert Englund, because he was just so charming and easy to market. But Jason and Freddy are two of the most marketed, famous. You see a hockey mask, you think Jason Voorhees. You don't even think hockey.
Yeah.
It could be any hockey mask, and they're like, "Oh, Jason Voorhees." Freddy is fucking Freddy. Like Michael never penetrated the mainstream the way they did.
Reek wants to know, so are you saying Michael is Ric Flair or Dusty? Can you think back who in Horror Movies and Waffles did we say Michael Myers was? I think I said Bray Wyatt. Did you say the Undertaker?
And I said the Undertaker. Yes.
Okay, so that.
And I would go with that because I would say that the Undertaker, while in my opinion the greatest of all time, especially at the character work, never penetrated the mainstream the way guys like. I mean, there's a song called Ric Flair Drip. If anything, I don't want to get you in trouble, so I'm going to be as very careful as I can by saying this. If anyone is Ric Flair, it's Freddy Krueger. And I think I also said this on Horror Movie and Raffles. For the sexual aspect of the character and his proclivities, as well as he is known very well for his vocal talents and what he says on the mic. And I'll leave it at that. If you want to look into it more, you can.
Allison agrees and says the Undertaker. As far as that goes, shameless plug. Go back and listen to Horror Movies and Waffles. It's
fantastic.
Not referenced at all to current or modern wrestling. So if you could listen to it tomorrow or 6 months ago, and it would have sounded the exact same, which is what I love about, like, when you and I do these, we very seldom ever talk about a finite time in wrestling. It's a very yeah, they're always good listens. Okay, let's go back to Michael Myers now. Okay, we're going to look at Halloween. October 2018, you get the David Gordon Green version of Michael Myers. Now, we start to see that break off of the original movie into his timeline, how he thought Laurie and Michael were part of each other, which is a fun thing to throw in here, that Danny McBride from Eastbound and Down was a screenwriter for this movie. He did all 3 movies in the new version of it. He was part of the screenwriting team behind David Gordon Green. So I think that was kind of a cool tidbit. So let's kind of start with Halloween on the 4th and final timeline of the Michael versus Michael series.
I fucking love Halloween 2018. It is, along with the original, top 3. I like it more than Halloween Ends. Halloween Kills. Halloween Kills, I appreciate the more I watch it. There are some things that we'll talk about here in a second that were a little for me, but this movie did everything that I needed it to do. It addressed everything I needed it to address. It made Michael out who I needed it to make Michael out to be. It also, again, copying kind of that formula, it looked at what modern horror was, and in modern horror and just in pop culture, like, people shit on Thor Love and Thunder because it's comical, but that's part of the mainframe of what is popular now in movies. Is it is this plus a little bit of comedy, and it sprinkled in just enough comedy so that it wasn't too serious. There was a little bit of brevity, but it was still a very serious movie. I don't know if you and I could sit here in the time that you want to have left and break down all of the homages that are created and the parallels that are created between all of the movies that came before this and just what's in this movie, let alone what we see in Halloween Ends. And again, I'll plug Havoc Hour. If you do want a very in-depth look at some of that stuff, go check out the Havoc Hour with me, Reek Havoc, and Katie, where we get very in-depth into Halloween and Halloween Kills and all of the different homages that are in there. But I mean, short list, just the first set of kills after Michael gets out of the sanitarium. Mind you, Michael is again out of the sanitarium. Um, the kill of the guy in the gas station, which is very similar to the kill of the guy in the gas station in 4. The bathroom scene with the podcaster. Also, shout out to the fact they had podcasters in there.
True.
Very similar to the scene, but far more brutal than the scene that we got in H2O. And that's the thing, is like, it was almost as if, you took what you got in some of these other movies, but then let Rob Zombie direct the kill scenes, because they are very graphic and very brutal and very much what you saw in the Rob Zombie Halloweens as far as the kills go. But the story isn't so much Hellbilly Deluxe.
So plowing through, you look at the intro, and when Michael leaves the psych ward and he's leaving for a max security prison, and he breaks loose and he gets out. This is where this version of the timeline branches off, because at the end of the first one, then this is where we're at. So we're isolating this story of who Michael is. You also look at the version of who Dr. Loomis is now, and the version of who Laurie is now as well. So once we get into Halloween, the 2018 version of Halloween, we see Laurie as this, not really her own version of a psychopath, but she's like this deranged drinker who's going crazy. She's preparing. She still has this gut feeling Michael's coming back. Like looking at this version of Laurie and this version of Loomis, like now we're in 2018. The story has changed. Michael broke out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 never happened. H2O resurrection never happened. Boom. This version of Michael and Laurie now.
But again, like I said, they pay homage to those, because this is a combination of H2O Laurie and Resurrection Laurie, where she is kind of crazy. She is an alcoholic, but she's also prepared, and she's been waiting. She's had the destroyed relationship. She's had a child. All of these things that they took from those movies.
Grandchild that's trying to keep everything all tied together so her grandmother doesn't lose her mind and get put back in a ward.
All of these things that they've taken from the other movies and just made fit into a new continuity, a new timeline. As Reek said, it's a study in trauma. Laurie isn't haunted like an H2O. She's secluded. She's always prepared for the eventual confrontation. So again, it's that combination. Also, you mentioned how he escapes with the bus crash, very much like the ambulance crash when he gets out at 4. Like, there's so many things that they sat down and they analyzed and went through these movies. Now, Loomis is not in this movie. Loomis doesn't show up until Halloween Kills.
Okay.
With the flashbacks, which we will talk about. But him returning is fantastic, and I cannot wait. No, everything that they did in this movie, I mean, there are parallels to the ending scenes of the first movie, where Laurie's the one that falls off the balcony and then is gone when Michael looks down. And just so much good shit here. And if you are a huge fan of the franchise, you see all of these things that are familiar. He literally walks through houses like he does in Halloween 2 and kills people fairly similar to and in the same order that he does in Halloween 2, in a nice little scene. But again, it's more graphic. It's got that Halloween, Rob Zombie Halloween kill style to it. So,
Reek also says the role reversals were fantastic. Seeing, that was like grown up Laurie, like ready to go Laurie, and I think that was one of the best versions of her. When we get into Halloween Kills, this was the one I said in Horror Movies and Waffles was my favorite version of Michael Myers. And I said the reason why I picked Bray Wyatt was because that eater of worlds, that silent but powerful guy who could kind of control a room without needing to say or do anything kind of role was how I felt about Michael Myers. When you get into this movie, he is definitely the big, huge, like I said, Super Saiyan badass. Before we get into Halloween Ends, let's go into Halloween Kills now. The kind of the last known piece. We haven't had a chance. Halloween Kills comes out in, let me pull it up, October 14th. So we're still a couple, 3 weeks out, 4 weeks out, depending on when this goes live. So 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or whatever.
Soon enough.
Yeah.
Hurry up.
Okay, so Halloween Kills. Once again, another David Gordon Green, all the same. But this version right here is building us up for how the conclusion is coming in a month. What did you think about Halloween Kills? And, You said your favorite Michael, but where do you rank this version of Michael now? And the most recent incarnation, the last film before the new one comes out.
He's up there with obviously the original, and then my favorite personal Curse of Michael Myers Halloween 6, because again, this is very much that. So even in this movie, again, we are watching the progression of these films, where in the first film, Michael's kind of a man, but nobody really understands how he gets up, and Loomis gives us the description of him being evil. And then in the last movie, it's kind of the same thing. Like, he's just this old dude that broke out, and he happens to be really strong and, takes pain very well and seems unstoppable. And then they trap him in a basement and light him on fire. The majority of this movie for me is fantastic. From, obviously, they brought back Tommy Wallace, and like I said, not a huge fan of the person they had portray him, but he's dead, so no harm, no foul. They bring back Alice mentioned it. Kylie Richards.
Yeah.
As an adult, because she played Lindsay Wallace in the original movie. So all of these people are still living in Hannaford. They're all still haunted. They know Lori. Lori is now in the hospital with her kid and her granddaughter. But now we're seeing this kind of Halloween 4, 5, and 6 supernatural version of Michael, especially by the end. And the way that Lori has now kind of turned into Dr. Loomis and is talking about it. Because while we didn't have Dr. Loomis, they did in the last movie have the Dr. Loomis surrogate, who actually ends up being some psycho who wants to let Michael Myers loose on the world for his own case study and let bad things happen. He's the opposite of Dr. Loomis. He wants to help Michael kill people instead of stopping Michael from ever hurting everyone again. The new quote unquote Loomis, which is, I think, is what you were talking about. Whereas in this movie, we get flashbacks to how Michael was captured, the great CGI that they used and the actor that they used to play Dr. Loomis in this movie, and the way they shot it so it looked like it was deleted scenes from the original movie. Like, fucking there's so much good about this, and one of those things is exactly what you asked me. I know I went off on a little tangent. I got excited.
I love
that
tangents.
This Michael, by the end of the movie, no matter how beat down he gets, no matter the ass kicking, gunshots, pummeling, this and that, he gets back up, and he gets back up stronger, and he gets back up angrier, and the hate makes him more powerful. The evil inside him grows, and he slaughters an entire town's worth of people who are kicking the living shit out of him, no problem.
So these three movies are under the Blumhouse Productions family, okay? That's the Black Phone, that's the Forever Purge.
Just watched Black Phone last night.
Glass. I was going to say, do you think having somebody like Blumhouse come in who has such a... I mean, you can go all the way back, all the way through the Purges, the Paranormal Activities, Sinister, The Craft. You look at Blumhouse, they have a reputable horror resume here. This version of Michael Myers through this, is this one of those where they got to take the sponge that has been Michael Myers now, and they got to put their Blumhouse version of it? We talked about the Rob Zombie version. We talked about the Carpenter version. Do you think that the 2018 and beyond version of who we see Michael Myers is just the Blumhouse version of Michael Myers?
Yes and no. Because while it is, and like I said, Blumhouse did some things that they've done in other movies that they've made, because there is a formula to make a box office successful horror film that they have worked very hard to create through all of these different movies. However, they do it the right way, because they're not going to come in and say, hey, I'm going to take this franchise and I'm going to make it whatever the fuck I want to be. They get people who love the franchise, who know the franchise, who respect the franchise, and they get John Carpenter to come in and consult on the characters and say, this is who Michael Myers is, this is who so-and-so is, this is how I portray them, this is what they would do, this is what they wouldn't do. So you're staying very true to what Halloween originally was by doing that, while also using a proven formula. And I know there are a lot of people out there who are like, oh, I hate Hollywood horror films and box office films, and I prefer independent. Okay, fine, but it's successful. It does well. It's entertaining as all shit, and it's very faithful to the original.
Reek says this Michael is more of an extension of Carpenter's original vision. They just made it their own. That's kind of what I was saying too, and I don't know why I used a sponge analogy, but for some reason, like taking what Michael Myers was through everything and kind of putting together their Frankenstein version of what Michael Myers is. Maybe a little bit of resurrection, maybe a little bit of what Carpenter had in the original ones, however it falls down. So I think in a
Maybe
weird
it's
way.
because while you've been listening to me talk, you've just been envisioning me giving you a sponge bath. That's where the sponge came in.
Well, that's what's going to happen after this. Once we go into botch spots and chair shots after dark, is for the sponge baths. And the
Sounds
fact
good.
that we're 7 hours away from each other is going to make it really interesting.
I'll figure it out.
Okay. So I need to ask about Black Phone. I don't want to go on a complete tangent, but you said you actually just watched it. I recently just watched it as well. It was very eerie in a dark sense, but it wasn't the traditional creepy, scary movie. What did you think about it? The idea of the grabber and Robin and everybody talking, and spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen it, we're about to ruin the movie for you. But like, what do you think about the build up through the phone and the conversations he's having throughout the movie, like building up to the victory, where it's like playing a level of a video game and then he passes that level, then he goes on to the next one. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, yeah. So I just literally watched it last night. My initial thoughts when the movie finished was I enjoyed it. I'm not mad that I spent my time watching it. However, I felt like this was parts of a movie that could have used a little more flushing out. There were things that were mentioned but not really explained, especially in the grabber's case with the masks and who he is, and it's implied that there are some similarities between Finney and the grabber and their home life and things like that, but it's not really flushed out and explained as to why he's doing this, where his motivations came from, so on and so forth. Where are the powers that Finney and his sister have? Like, it's mentioned that the mom has powers, but like what these are, where they came, like what's going on. So I feel like it was a good movie that I enjoyed. I don't know if I'd go back and watch it again. I don't know if it has rewatchability for me because I feel like there's a lot missing, but there is a lot more that I'd like to know. So if there is, I don't know how there would be a sequel, but if there was a sequel to the movie, I'd be very interested in, or maybe a prequel about it. Like, I'd be very interested in the lore of it. It left me content but wanting.
I think if they release a director's cut of it and they give us all the missing stuff and the deleted scenes and kind of fill in the plot holes a little bit, I would rewatch a director's cut of it.
Yes,
I thought
yes.
it was in premise a good story, but like you said, there's faults in it. There's going to be faults in every horror movie, especially one like that.
Except for Halloween.
Except for Halloween, of course. Michael Myers was perfect. But I was curious about your take on it because I just watched it probably within the last couple weeks, and I was curious about your opinions on it. All right, we're rounding it out. Halloween Kills, October 14th. It's coming up. All the Blumhouse stuff. What's the one thing you're most looking forward to about the end of the series or the apparent end to the series with Halloween Ends?
The one thing that I am most excited for is also the one thing that terrifies me the most is how we close out this franchise, because we've seen it in horror movie franchises a million times before. Fucking Friday the 13th, the final chapter. Freddy's dead. Like, and then they bring him back. Like, it is what it is. So calling this Halloween Ends doesn't necessarily mean that, but the intention is to end the franchise. It is to put a close on Michael Myers. So my apprehension and my excitement is because I've loved everything they've done. And the only thing that has felt out of place for me was the whole social commentary that they added into Halloween Kills with the psych patient and the mob mentality and forcing him to jump. That seemed almost kind of like a side story outside of what was going on in the actual film, and in theaters took me out of it. Doesn't bother me much in subsequent watches, but Yeah, so how we close the film out. I am very excited to see the ending of their vision for how this plays out and how you stop Michael Myers and how everything finishes, but also fucking terrified that it's not going to be a satisfying. Because how do you do? Like, how do you do it? How do
Um,
you fucking do it?
Reek brings it up. Somebody has to bite it, and we're at the point where you don't want either character to go. I was gonna ask, do you feel like at this point both Lori and Michael have to go together for it to be a true finale and conclusion for the series? We've seen them
I
both die in the series in various forms in various movies, but do you think for it to be true Halloween ends, both have to go and both have to go together?
I mean, for Halloween to end, Michael has to go. That no ands, ifs, and buts about it. In the trailer, Lori says that for Michael to die, she has to die too. We've seen Lori die. We've heard that Lori died in a car crash. We've watched Lori die on screen. So Lori dying isn't really an end all for me. If they go out together in a blaze of glory, that's one thing. Also, again, Lori's niece or granddaughter, not niece, is still there, has to play a factor. Does she die? And is that now all of my family is gone and I have nothing left to live for? The final straw that allows Lori to, you know, come to terms with sacrificing herself and Michael. Like, do you jump into a volcano so that his body is complete? Like, there's no chance of, like, again, how, because they lit him on fire, they've done all the, like, how do you end him? I almost kind of want it to be the axe to the head from H2O just to like go full circle with the homages, chop his head off, but then Lori's
That's
still
the
alive.
one that does
Unless
it.
unless her granddaughter does it. But I think both have to die. And I'm not sure how they're gonna go about it.
I agree. They both have to as well. I feel like if Michael has to go, there's no questions. If Michael were to survive, then it can't be Halloween ends. I don't feel like Lori goes without Michael going to for obvious reasons. So I feel like that's the only one we have. Reek chimes in, says this has gone past the point of the boogeyman chasing the final girl. It's more of a rivalry between the two, and that's even how it's being promoted. And I love the fact that they're kind of booking it that way, that they're booking it, Lori versus Michael, the showdown. I think it's a genius marketing plan. I think that's going to be the push through the whole movie is everybody's going to be sitting in anticipation of who, when, where, and why they're going to die. And I think that's going to be the biggest point of the movie is there's going to be lots of blood, there's going to be lots of carnage, there's going to be lots of death, but when will Lori and when will Michael both die?
This is my favorite horror movie franchise of all time. And I've watched all the horror movie franchises. I need to be in theaters to see this. There aren't like there are Marvel movies that come out, and I'm like, I really want to go see that. I can't wait to go see that. But there haven't been a lot of movies recently where I felt like I need to be there and see this and see it as soon as possible. This is one of those movies for me that I as soon as I get the chance, as soon as I can get a babysitter, I would, if she'd let me and not kill me and probably divorce me, leave my wife at home with the child and go see it by myself if I had to. I need to go see this. So they've done a great job with the last two movies to get me to the point to where it's like this is something that I can't wait for video on demand. I can't, you know, I need to go out there. I don't want anyone to say anything or spoil anything. I need to see it before I see anything on it so people don't ruin the fucking movie for me. Like that's where I'm at.
Agreed. Like I said, it's just a matter of when I can plug that couple hours into the schedule that weekend. And I will probably go radio dark until I have a chance to see it because I don't want to read a review. I don't want anything that's going to skew my mind as far as what I'm thinking I'm going to see. I just want to go in there and see it. So, Matt, this is my favorite part of every episode. I don't have to say anything. I get to ask you to plug your stuff, tell everybody what you've got going on at Smacking It Raw and Creation World, and plug it all, my guy.
You can follow me at Matt Ritter, ZMATTRIDDR on Twitter only. Also, Smacking a Raw Pod on Twitter as well. Creation World is the banner on which the Smacking a Raw podcast exists. You can find them at creationworld.com on Twitter and Instagram at It's Creation World, ITSCREATIA World. Facebook.com/Creation World. Also, we have a Facebook group. It is facebook.com/group/smacking it raw. Tonight, live on YouTube and Twitch, hashtag them dragons. If you are watching House of the Dragons, we go live after every episode and recap what's going on in House of the Dragons. So come check me, Travis, and Mara out for that tonight. If you didn't get enough of me here today, there's always that. Also, as I said, next month, I haven't got a date. I'm still working on a logo and some things. But once all that is set in stone, me, Katie, and Reek, and maybe even Will, definitely will at some point. But depending on what the first episode ends up being, and if Reek has time to come and join us, we'll be going live and doing Terabytes Plus, which is going to be very horror centric. Will be me talking all things horror movies. I've told Reek that the Havoc Hour still gets its first dibs on the things he wants to talk about, because that is where all of this kind of has been the home of. But he has also been very busy lately, and Katie and I get tired of waiting. So we're doing this as well to kind of help lighten his load a little bit. And I appreciate him being so cool about that. So look for Terabytes Plus as well. Again, everything Matt Ritter, link trees, all at Matt Ritter on Twitter.
Also, we have a common ground in Hill Tactics, the new intro for Botch Spots and Chair Shots. Big shout out to him. He does your show. He does She Elite as well. You know the list better than I do. But a lot of the podcasting community that we tend to associate with, Hill Tactics has done a lot of the intros for. Follow Just a Girl 918, the boss bitch Miss Alison. She's kind of the brain trust and mind power behind everything Smacked Raw and Botch Spots and Chair Shots. Follow the Smacked Raw podcast and Mr. 8984 RN and the Kai Tai Show. And now, as we close another episode of Botch Spots and Chair Shots, I want to take a minute and thank you for listening. Remind you to go wherever you do anything on the internet and like, follow, subscribe, unsubscribe, then subscribe again. Leave a comment telling me how great I am or how terrible we sound. Either way, it helps the algorithm and it helps find new listeners. If you're feeling really generous and be one of the VIP people, head over to patreon.com and donate to the Smacked Raw Podcast Network. You get some fantastic swag. We get some fantastic guests. It's a win-win. For my personal Pornhub poppy and the warden, Matt Ritter, I'm the Will Gray. Thanks for stopping by and listening, my people.
Bye.